Mics are up. Studio silence, please. Good morning to you, and thank you for joining us on Freshly Pressed 981. It's a segment of Smooth Breakfast with Valentine Ohu.
And I am Myra. Say good morning.
Good morning to you, and thank you for joining us. Please join the conversation by sending us messages on WhatsApp 0809
On Twitter, we're at Smooth981FM. Kindly use the hashtag freshly pressed 981. On YouTube, we're streaming live. Go onto YouTube. Kindly subscribe to our page, Smooth981FM Lagos. The headlines are on all our social media platforms, so please go on there.
All right, for Feel Good Friday conversation, we have Cheta Wanze joining us at Checks Down Twitter. Good morning.
Good morning.
And we have Waji Jibuno. He's at the Corporate MC. Corporate is with a K. Good morning, Waji.
Morning, Valentine. Morning, Aya. Morning, Jetta. And good morning, Lagos.
Welcome. Now, let's start with this story from Premium Times. Federal government Southwest governors agree on Amotekun. Now, the federal government, as represented by Yemi Oshibajo, the Vice President, and the Attorney General and the Inspector General of Police, or rather, the Attorney General Abubakar Malami and the Inspector General of Police Mohammed Abubakar, interfaced with this governors, the 6 governors of the Southwest states, and reached a form of agreement saying that essentially encouraging them to align with the law. What are your thoughts on this story, please, Cheta?
Um, I mean, in the whole of Governor Keredolu's statements after the meeting, I still didn't see um, where the state governors said that they will go to their houses of assembly to sort of codify Amotekun into law. But that's besides the point for me. I think despite the presence of the Attorney General in this meeting, the more relevant thing was the fact that the president and his people arrived hours back in the country, hours after the meeting. And it's telling that not long after this meeting, the Office of the Attorney General released a statement where he reaffirmed the FG stand that Amotekun is illegal. The statement, and it was reported by the cable about 7 p.m. yesterday. The statement reiterated that Nigeria's constitution does not accommodate the formation of a regional security architecture, and proceeded to ask the states to enact the necessary laws, otherwise they would be justifying the illegality of the establishment and operation of Amotekun. The operation is currently illegal. That's what the Minister of Justice said. Or that's what the Office of the Minister of Justice, which is speaking on his behalf, really pretty much said. The meeting with the Vice President, in my view, was just one to diffuse tension, and being that the Vice President is from the region that is pushing for Amotekun, to be seen to be on the side of the people. Because at the end of the day, the fact is that the people in the region are demanding it, especially since the murder of Parfas Onrati's daughter, Funke, I think. It's very important that we keep hammering on the fact that the federal government does not have a finger on the security issues in the country. It's not deniable. We have made a culture of deploying the army to do what is essentially police work. The Nigerian army, as of the end of December last year, is deployed in 35 of Nigeria's 36 states, doing police work. And yet, all sorts of things still happen. At some point, something will have to give, because one of the fundamental things that grants a government legitimacy is the ability to secure the lives and property of its people. If they cannot, then the reality is that regions, states, local governments, whatever, will demand that right. It's just the reality. let's not beat around the bush about this before we start talking of all the other add-ons to the program, as the tribalism or the primitiveness or the whatever. All those are add-ons. The fundamental thing is that the federal government of Nigeria has failed in that primary duty to protect the lives and property of Nigerians. So eventually, state governments or regional governments will take it upon themselves. End of story. We cannot avoid that.
But is it that the federal government is turning a blind eye to the security concerns, the lapses that are very, apparent, or
Can I answer that?
is it no, or is it just taking us? Would I? I'm carefully using the word obstinate stance. Calling it illegal. What's the next step? It's not as if the security concerns are just unique to us. We know that there's a detachment, so to speak, but I'm trying to understand the optics now. So, say declaring something illegal, are you just saying, "Oh, you guys you're not put your house together, go and make it right"?
Focusing on concepts such as legality and illegality for me is a red herring. Slavery was once legal. Reality on the ground is there are armed bands of people moving around unhindered within the borders of Nigeria in the different regions. That's the reality. And regional governments will face a demand from the people who they are closest to do
protected.
something about it.
Yeah, that's it.
End of story.
Thank you, gentlemen. Our next story from this, the newspaper. Federal government suspends salaries of tertiary institutions. But before that, very quickly, we'll go to this story. Let's just shelve that for a second. This, the newspaper reports that states are bowing to pressure to reduce the right-of-way charges. Now, it just plays out, like we always see, the right-of-way charges that's been given to telcos to pay. The states decided to do an increase, which violated an agreement that the federal government had signed a few months back. But take us through this story, because it just plays out like the regular, things that we see in the news, where there wasn't proper research done. We understand that state governments or governments at every level are supposed to have some legal representation that would even give advisory support. But what's this showing?
Well, interestingly enough, last week, this story was talked about on Tech Friday with Rotus and
Yes.
Sayo, and it came up, and there was a very interesting debate between the two of them, where Rotus felt that the government needs to step in to regulate the states with regards to the price hikes with right of way towards telecommunications that would now allow them to lay telecommunications infrastructure in their states. And Fasaya's position was that the states look at their own cost profile and determine what that costing should be, that there should be no federal government oversight. But then now, 1 week later, the states have now bowed to the pressure because of clearly some lobby groups or people outcrying towards the federal government to intervene. So there are many ways that you can begin to look at this, right? In the sense of, is the government right or not? And it depends on your philosophical view towards government oversight. If you're going to ask me my own very professional opinion, I think each particular state should determine what their pricing capacity is to be able to have right of way in their states. If you govern your state in a federation, then you should be able to make that kind of technical assessment to say, well, in my state, I understand what the infrastructure costs are, I understand what the labor costs are, and everything else. So if you want to operate in this particular state, this is how much it's going to cost. That's the whole point of being a federation, that allows your states to govern themselves. Now, when federal governments now begin to come in and put pressure on oversight, put pressure with oversight, to now say that, okay, no, we should regulate it. What is the justification for that? Are you just trying to appease the particular telco company, or are you paying attention to the fact that you maybe do not know what a particular state has in terms of cost? So if it's going to be, let's just use two states, for example, Kogi and Adabawa State, for example, right? Are you now going to subsidize an expensive cost in one state versus another for them to be able to now lay down those cables for telecommunication to have the right of way? Do you understand? So it's one thing for the government to now put pressure on the states to bow down to a single charge, but it's about understanding the reasons why these states had those individual costs to begin with. For those states, it could have been a revenue driver.
Yes.
It could have been anything. We don't know the reason. So when you now take that opportunity away, are you now going to subsidize, as a federal government, since you're interfering, towards those states to ensure that they make up that cost, or those costs are covered? So there could be a bunch of reasons why. So I'm not a fan of the federal government getting involved and demanding and putting pressure on the states to capitulate. I understand and I get it. I think the follow-up from this would be, is the federal government going to give states particular allocations that could now make the difference between the cost that they had proposed versus what the government is asking them to do?
I don't think we can afford allocations or subsidize
No, we can't
anything
afford
at this
anything,
point.
but
But wouldn't it make more sense to just? I'll give reference to the consequential adjustment of the minimum wage, for instance, and then vis-a-vis thinking about or casting your mind back to how the tax issue came up 2 years back, where it seemed as if before we had the joint tax board, we had different states charging, taxing people arbitrarily, and including telcos, and they complained about this. Wouldn't it make sense for there to be like a consequential adjustment to the rates that they should charge instead of just putting the peg, a sum for every state? Because we know states have different terrains, right?
So I don't. That's why and it's funny, Valentine, because we only seem to have this deregulation conversation when it comes to petroleum products and other things like that. At that point, we begin to say that the federal government has no business regulating the price, the pump price, and everything else. Because after all, if you now begin to look at what's going on in other parts of the country, it costs money for you to transport those particular products from the ports all the way down to the interlands of Nigeria. So why on earth who's going to pay that cost? So in eastern Nigeria, for example, they've been selling pump price for 120, 140 naira for 5-7 years. It's not even something they're going to. No, they do.
120?
How much?
Like 180.
Oh, 180. Thank you. Okay, but you're buttressing my point. But thank you, Cheta. So my point is, they're not even going to have a debate about what that pump price is going to be, because they're like, who's going to cover this cost of us transporting it here? So if you use that example, right, why is federal government now getting involved in this? You don't know what the cost of doing business is. So why are you now coming out to be this knight in shining armor that you're here fighting for Nigerians and fighting for everybody's rights? It's all rubbish. Just stay out of it. This is, Cheta always makes this point about, this is the problem of the federal government trying to get involved in business, whereas what you are meant to do is create enabling environments for businesses to thrive, not to get in there to begin to now regulate how businesses should be operated.
All right, thank you very much. So essentially, the governors of the 36 states of the Federation have unanimously agreed to reverse the right of way charges for telecom facilities from the planned 6,000 naira down to 145 naira per linear meter.
I'm going to say something controversial. No particular governor wants to get sacked. I'm sorry.
All right, so Rosemary on WhatsApp, in reaction to Cheta's analysis of the first story, says, I'm not pleased that Cheta is focusing on the tribal aspect. Today we do have a regional government. Wait, hold on, Cheta. So
me? I didn't say
anything. Sorry. So it is not right to say put your house together and enact state laws. You cannot use illegality to solve illegality. On the other hand, Gideon thinks that your analysis was brilliant. And then we have Trevor Noah's Lapelpin, who says, well done, federal government of Nigeria, #right of way. And then we have from Jim, the telcos pay taxes to the federal government, which shares with the states. The responsibility not to kill the telcos is the federal government's thrust. And so please let us have your comments on Twitter and YouTube.
I just want to correct that one person made a comment. Chetab made no illusions towards tribalism, so I don't know where that's coming from.
People hear what they want to hear.
This newspaper has this next story, Cheta. Federal government suspends salaries of tertiary institutions workers that's not on EPIS. Does this feel like a sledgehammer, or is it a better way to handle this?
But no, this is one place that I am in complete and total support of the federal government. If you people want your salary, go and register on the EPS. Let everything be rationalized. Let everything be transparent. I mean, you can't be making demands. This, and then the person that is paying will say, "Okay, how are you spending my money?" And then you start saying you don't have a right to see how I'm spending money. Nonsense. End of story. You see, holds the salary. If they don't want to teach, let them go home. If they want to close down the school, let them close it down. Hold the salary.
All right. Thank you.
Straightforward.
Very straightforward.
I mean,
our next story now, this time from Vanguard newspaper. Nigeria records 2,181 vandalized pipeline points in 1 year. Waji, the story is for you, please.
I mean, this is really sad when you now begin to look at that. This just speaks to the state of insecurity in the nation. I mean, when you now connect it back to the first story that was covered with regards to this Amotekun situation, this is now speaking to the number of armed bandits that we have in the country going around operating with carte blanche and absolute impunity to just do whatever they want. So if people are living in, I mean, just think about it from this point of view, 2,181. If you now begin to counter how many people have died from these explosions of vandalizations, just look at the one that happened last week at a Limo show. I'm not sure what the numbers were. Was it like 7 or 10 people that passed away? But in some cases, a lot more than that. So if you come from that particular community and you see that nothing's happening, these pipelines are targets for criminals to miscreants to now attack. You form a community, and guess what you do? You patrol that pipeline, not because you have any particular vested interest in any oil and gas that comes out of it, but what you're doing is protecting your community from vandalization that's eventually going to burn down the community and, in worst cases, kill people. But without the absolute presence of security that now protects those particular pipelines, these are the issues that you're going to continue to have. So it's down to a security issue. It's down to ensuring that people who want to get involved in criminal activities are discouraged from doing it because of the penalties that ensue when you decide to engage in such, wrong behavior. So it's a security concern, and that's why we're having these particular issues. So what we need to figure out from a security point of view is how to discourage people from doing this, and that's where you just have more effective policing that now engages the community and let people know that there are consequences for your actions.
Thank you very much. I mean, the effective policing is somebody's responsibility. At some point, it was just the federal government, and then later on, it was some part of their responsibility was vested to the oil companies. So in this issue, yes, fine. There's a lapse in security, operations or apparatus has been set up. So whose responsibility is it? I mean, because if you're losing money from pipeline vandalism between October 2018 to October 2019 to that toll of over 2,000,
it's the federal government.
It's a clear example of how the federal government has abdicated its responsibility. Then if tomorrow Lagos state says, okay, our people are dying from this pipeline explosions. By the way, Waji was very polite when he said that 7 people passed away in Abule Egba last week. 7 people were roasted. That was what happened. Now, if Lagos tomorrow wakes up and says that they want to protect their people and the pipelines passing through their territory, the hypocritical federal government will come and start behaving, say no. They'll come and start, I mean, come on.
Beyond even the state, I mean, if the companies themselves whose pipelines are vandalized come out to say that they want to, because we know that for some organizations,
federal government won't talk, as long as it's oil pipeline, they won't talk to company, don't worry.
For some organizations, they have a community approach to dealing with this, and that is so engendering goodwill. Some of them try to meet with community leaders.
No, I think Valentine's point is whose responsibility is it to protect the guidelines?
Yes.
Security lies at the vestiges of the federal government. That's number one.
Yes,
if you choose to outsource it or abdicate it, then don't now be hypocritical with your statements when other groups, either an oil company decides to form a militia or a militia forms themselves to protect themselves. Don't be hypocritical with your stats. So it's either you keep quiet and allow people to protect themselves, or you do the policing yourself.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We move on to our next story, but before then, we go to Bengus's comment. I thought ASU is an association of the academics and intellectuals. It's laughable and ridiculous that ASU wants the government to fund the university education, yet they don't want the government to monitor and regularize their spending. We support corruption when it favors us. We complain about it only when it doesn't favor us. Share hypocrisy. All right, let's move on to our next story, talking about corruption and when it favors us and doesn't favor us. Move on to Transparency International's latest ranking of Nigeria. So just very quickly, Nigeria is ranked 34th place from the bottom, so 146 out of 180 countries, and in Africa we are 4th, well, just above Equatorial Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, and Cameroon. Please take us through the story, Cheta.
Transparency International released a statement, released their reports ranking that essentially shows that we're the most corrupt country in West Africa.
One of the most corrupt.
No, in West Africa.
In West Africa, we are the most corrupt according to the ranking, period. Now, when I was reading the Manami's reaction, I found 2 light bulbs going on in my head. The first one was, is this not the same government that was, last year, our ranking improved by 4 places in last year's results. And this same government was parading the ranking that you see, their policies are working. Now that the thing has fallen down, they are suddenly saying that, oh, this. So I went digging and I found out when Nigeria dropped from 139 to 144 back in 2013, the Minister of Information at the time, Labaran Marco, said that The president and the government that he was serving in could not be blamed for the latest corruption ranking of the country. He went on to say that such reports, Transparency International's ranking, was based on comments of Nigerians who were always eager to tell the world how bad the country is and pull the country down. He went on to regret that such an aggregate of people's perceptions did not recognize the various efforts and strides by the governments to fight corruption. And then he challenged Transparency International to provide the metrics that they use to measure corruption in Nigeria. Remove Labaran Mako and put Abubakar Malami. It was exactly the same thing that was repeated yesterday. They didn't even bother to change the CD. Just take the CD is obsolete now. They didn't.
I mean, we know that's a general term.
They didn't change the MP3 player. It was the same MP3 player. Now, the interesting bit. So, because if you go further down, it's just that the PDP is not very creative as an opposition party. But reacting to Labaran Mako's statements, a certain Lai Mohammed, who at the time was the spokesman of the APC didn't exist at the time, of the ACN. What was the ACN's? What was
I think it was Action Congress.
Action Congress of Nigeria. Thank you. A certain Lai Mohammed said that the situation was totally unacceptable. And I'll quote, he made a lengthy diatribe, and I'll take just one quote from it. It is interesting that the minister of the Federal Republic of Nigeria is comparing the country with smaller countries when it comes to justify projects that will benefit a few elites. Does the minister know that citizens of the so-called smaller countries enjoy uninterrupted power supply? Does he know that the citizens of those countries do not have to queue up endlessly for petrol and kerosene, that they don't have to depend on Okada for transportation, and that they have no road as terrible as Lagos-Ibadan Expressway? PDP learn how to do opposition. I mean, anyway, the bottom line is it's all hogwash. Corruption is getting worse in the country. Even our own Bureau of Statistics data indicates that. And when you have arbitrary enforcement, because I'm not going to fault Malami in saying that, oh, we have new laws and all of that to fight corruption. Having laws is not the issue. You can make laws from heaven to earth. It's how you enforce them. And the biggest, where this government failed on its anti-corruption fight, and that was what condemned the anti-corruption fight straight from the board, arbitrary enforcement. Once you start looking at people's face, once justice is no longer wearing blindfold, but one part of the blindfold don't go down, that's the end of it.
Thank you very much. Bolan sent the message on WhatsApp. He says, so in the midst of the government's anti-corruption crusade, we're slipping backwards on Transparency International's index. Ha, ha, ha. We've said it time and time again. The corruption fight is perceived to be lopsided. Perception is reality. What structures has the government put in place to tackle corruption or take on this fight? Is it systematic?
Thank you very much, Bolan. We move on to our next story here. Amechi surprises staff, visits office unannounced from the Vanguard newspaper. So in a bid to ascertain the level of commitment by staff of his ministry, Minister of Transportation, Honorable Chibuike Rotimi Amechi, paid a surprise visit to staff in their different offices. Now, Waji, interesting article here, and he talks about what he met on ground and some of the reasons that were given for the reasons why there were people not in their offices. Please, can you share with us? This is just an example of what happens in our civil service.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why this is news, to be perfectly honest. Okay, so he went and did a visitation around his office to see that it was abandoned by 3 p.m. And the reasons, Ayo, like you indicated, that people gave was that people were either attending training or they were on leave. But he also discovered that there were issues with regards to the state of the offices. It was in complete disrepair and dysfunctionality, and he's now showing that he is an action man who walks around and comes to do physical checks on whether you're on seat or not and things like that. How that has to do with the price of tea in China or any kind of efficacy with regards to how that ministry operates, I have absolutely no idea. So I'm not sure what the story is about.
Okay, so taking away from the minister, right, and looking at spot checks, particularly with how efficiently organizations are run, we know that in the private sector we do have incidences like this, and whereby in some
But we don't
cases,
have this kind
wait,
of thing in
hold
the
on.
private sector.
In
really.
some cases, you have spot checks. Not
Oh, okay,
not
spot
just
checks.
yeah, I mean
Okay, I
spot
thought you
checks.
meant people just sitting down
No,
and
no, no,
wasting
not
the
at all. I
employer's
mean
money.
spot checks to check if you had an organization and you were tipped off that your people are not doing what they're supposed to do. You are a CEO of a large organization and you choose to go there. Remove it from the politicization of this, whereby okay, the minister showing that I'm responsible, I'm going there. But how do we check excesses in the civil service? It's a big problem.
Yeah.
We talk about corruption. We know that people say if you want to run a side hustle successfully, just work in the civil service because you put your pair of sleep shoes there. I've heard stories. So how do we check?
Stop
these
making government
excesses?
so attractive to go to.
It's not even. It's not even. The pay. The pay is crap. So
No,
it's
no, it's not
even.
the pay. No, it's not the pay, but it's the avenue.
Mm.
That's the point. It's what Aya said. It's an attractive place for you to go there and do nothing and be able to engage in all sorts of activities that now make you money. So it's the environment I'm referring to.
I have a slight twist.
Okay.
We need to rationalize government employment. It's too
Yeah,
overbloated.
it is overblown.
So you go into, so for example, one of the recent times I was in Abuja, I went to a ministry that we had, and there were 8 people in an office meant for 2. They were all employed there. And the funny thing was, I entered there and we gisted about government from 10 a.m. that I entered till 3 p.m. that I left. I got nothing done. They got nothing done. But we all gisted and we're all friends.
Day
I
well
see.
spent.
A day well spent. I enjoyed it. It was very sweet gist.
That's my point about how attractive
But
it is. Just
2
go there
people
and do
can
nothing.
handle that work
Yeah.
and they will work efficiently.
You know, this also talks about nepotism and the reason why people have such a bloated, service in terms of civil service, because you put, oh, my niece needs a job, just put him in this department, whether he's doing anything or not. So these are some of the things that we need to start talking about and talking about corruption in the civil service.
All right, Tyler from Yaba says, Waji, the story is a follow-up to winning the best minister of the decade. He will get to the office and shout and nothing will happen, he said. Dile says, trim the civil service. Ministry workers not in the office and they're screaming minimum wage. Yemi says, we don't do spot checks. There's a performance management system in place and managers are held accountable. Dami says, 2 top selling points of Buhari administration were security and anti-corruption. How are we doing? What is the scorecard of this Buhari APC?
All right, let's move on quickly because we have 2 very important stories to touch. So I'd love for you to just keep this really succinct. Now, the first one, Cheta, since you have the mic, Premium Times reports Minister to Investors invest in Nigeria's creative industry. This is from the Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed. Please take us through the story.
I wouldn't take us through the story. I think that the whole call to invest is nonsense. I'll just tell 2 very quick stories. And one of them is that I'll read directly from a tweet that went out yesterday from somebody who was trying to organize an event in Nigeria and then received a letter from the foreign partners. The letter reads in parts. Hello, Janine. Unfortunately, because of the incredibly difficult and lengthy visa process for Nigeria, we have decided to reroute to Ghana. We will work with your partner for tours out of Ghana to see Benin and Togo. I do apologize, but keep my payments and apply it to lobbying the government of your country to become more
Can you
tourist
imagine?
friendly or at least less unfriendly, as it is a deterrent to travel to your country. It is by far the most difficult visa process I have seen in the world, and I have been to 150 countries. Thanks for your help.
My gosh.
Nay, they even told her keep the money, use it for lobbying. Tell you.
So we make it difficult. We can't
Second
attract
story.
investors, yeah.
I was privy to some foreign investors wanting to come to Nigeria, and the Nigerian consultants they went to London for a meeting with them, and they were in the middle of the meeting when somebody outside the meeting hall walked in and played a video for them. It was Showore, the arrest or rearrest of Showore, when our secret police went into the court, violated the sanctity of the court to pick him up. And then one of the compliance people turned to the Nigerian guy and said, if we have a problem, disputes with the government, as must happen in a business environment, it's one of the inevitabilities of business is dispute.
Yeah.
Who do we meet to resolve the issue? Guy starts to the chop mouth.
All right. Thank you. very much.
Then you expect investors to come.
Yeah, so make
Yeah.
the environment conducive and they will naturally come to invest in that space. Let's go to our final story here. Another big one that went on social media yesterday. US visa, pregnant applicants to face tough scrutiny from the Punch newspaper. Waji, please, your take on this.
My take is very simple, and I know it's not a popular take, but I'll make it clear. I mean, we especially the reasons why we are very particular about this story is because we in Nigeria like to benefit from baby tourism or going abroad to have babies so that your babies can have U.S. passports. So whatever that government decides to do, you not being a citizen of that country must comply. You do not have any rights to complain or to fetch about what they've decided to do. What has been clearly indicated is that if you want to go over there to have your baby, you're going to now have to officially apply for a medical visa. You can no longer go there using a tourist visa. Clear and simple. So whatever the stipulations of that medical visa requirements are, you now have to go through that particular process. There's really no conversation to be had. I don't understand why people are getting upset and they're saying that why are they doing this? They can do whatever they want.
Thank you very
It's
much.
clear
for
as
clarifying
day.
it,
I don't know what else there is to be said.
To many people, it wasn't clear as day because
but
the
listen, then read.
in this read, the rumors flying around yesterday was that they put a ban to it. You can no longer have your
No,
children abroad.
it's just saying you can't do it
Thank
under
you
the
very
tourist
much, under
visa.
the tourist visa.
Apply for a medical visa. If you qualify, you get it, and there won't be any issues.
And the decisions are at the discretion of
It's
the
the discretion of the consular officer.
consular
Thank
officer.
you.
Thank you very much for your analysis, Waji. Is at Corporate MC on Twitter with a corporate with a K, and Cheta is at CHXTA on
What
Twitter.
do you say as they're pushing us from studio?
Yeah. Next, we talk sports inside of the locker room. Stay with us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, do you know
I'm not
funny
going to talk
enough-
about that story because
Which
the
one?
tourist visa, I used to bought my 250.
No, but it was allowed at the
Yes,
time. It
I
was
know,
allowed. But you know, the truth is that
You didn't
it was
violate
allowed.
any law.
Yeah,
No,
you
I didn't.
didn't.
No, now they're changing their
Yeah.
laws.
I've never overstayed a visa.
Well, you're
in my
missing the
life.
point. And this is what, so a friend of mine is having this issue now
Yeah.
where something happened, said, they got denied. I asked her, did you overstay? And she now started getting funny. I said,
Yeah, I've never
so
overstayed
there's
a
nothing I
visa in
can,
my life.
there's nothing I can do for you. I can't.
The worst that has happened for me is that it was the last day. And that was when I was moving back to Nigeria from the UK. It was the day my visa expired.
Even when your visa
So my
expires, there's still
fiance, right?
there's still
She's
like
in the US,
some time.
right? Oh, well, she's on her way back. She was supposed to come back on Tuesday next week, but she now looked at her passport and realized that my passport is actually no, the visa. Her visa is expiring
It doesn't matter.
today.
No,
Did you get? No,
the visa expiring has nothing to do with your length of stay because when they give you, they can only give you like a 60-day thing to
Window.
stay. Yeah.
No, but at the embassy, like at because she connected to London.
Mhm.
When she was going, they told her that we'll have a problem allowing you fly, except you promise that you're gonna adjust it and we'll confirm from the whatever
She
in
did.
the US. Yeah, she did. And she changed her date.
Those things are not issues.
So
The issues are people who
People are badly behaved.
apply for tourist visas,
yes,
and everybody
you
in
feel
this
like they're
room,
smart.
everybody in this room knows people who have done it,
Of
and
course, now.
are still there.
I went to
So let's
a
not-
baby
let's-
dedication. Not
the
Naso's
girl
wife.
that-
She just went to. She got born now. 4 months ago.
The
What's
girl-
the line?
the girl that's so when Lola had Ibuka and Olana, funny, we actually took the kids to see the woman this period that we went. So there's a woman who runs such a